Christian, you have to
I was a
accept
Christian
that.
before, so I know what we're talking about.
Okay, so
but the problem is, if someone came, like an ambassador today,
Yeah.
is it the country or is it the president or anything? No, you just represent the country. That's it. Jesus clearly said many times, many points.
Yeah, but he did.
I was sent.
But he
to these
also,
people only.
But he also said other things. So, for example, if you read the Gospel of Mark and only Mark, you wouldn't need. There's nowhere really that it obviously says Jesus is God. Right? If you read the Gospel of John, then it's a bit clearer. And one of the reasons why Christianity has this very confusing theory about Jesus, he's both God and man, he has two natures, but one person, one will, etc., is precisely because it has to reconcile all these different accounts.
Where in the Bible they say Jesus is both man and God?
It doesn't say it explicitly.
So you create something new.
But then again, a book, when you read the meaning of a book isn't always directly stated
Jesus never
in the book.
said he was both.
No, Jesus didn't say it, but
his disciples
the
say he was a
Christian
man.
church has to make
James
sense
say he
of
was
the
a man.
four Gospels.
Peter say he was a man.
Yeah.
The Nazarene.
The Christian church needs to make sense of the four Gospels that it has.
In the
So it
Bible,
has to
there is
reconcile
nothing like
statements
that.
in Matthew
You create
and
something
in
new
John.
and you impose it to the people. That's what I don't get.
But
When in the Bible they say, when the Bible says Jesus has
we
two
have
natures.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
And then the letters of Paul.
And you have
That's
more,
in the
yeah.
Bible.
And Peter and John and Jude.
Chronologically, that's incorrect. Because the letters of Paul came first.
But the Bible doesn't claim otherwise.
Wait a minute. Okay, so now in John 1:1, what does it say?
In the beginning was the Word, the Word was God, and the Word was God.
Okay, what? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was
God.
with no.
Was
The
with.
Word was with God.
And the Word was God.
And the Word.
Yeah.
So the Word is God, and God is God. So.
No, because if you actually...
So what is the Word? I am with
Well,
Him.
because
and
you see,
he's
when you
with
study
me.
a
How
text,
many
you
are
need
we?
to study the cultural context in which that text was written. Now, have you ever heard of a guy called Philo of Alexandria? Okay, so he was a Jew in the 1st century, and the Jews in the Near East were influenced by Greek thought. And in Greek thought there was an idea of the Logos. And the idea of the Logos was that the Greeks thought that the original God was so beyond anything that there was no bridge to him. So in order for God to communicate with anything outside of him, he almost kind of like generated this other side of himself, which was called the Logos, because it was about communication, it was about the Word. So if you read John 1 in the context of Greek philosophy and of Hellenistic Judaism, it's quite clear what he's saying. Whether you accept it or not, what he's saying is he's identifying Jesus with the Logos. And the Logos is a manifestation of God as he appears to other people, as opposed to God in himself. Right?
Having read the Bible, tell me, how many times did God come to earth as a human being?
Well, I don't think he did he?
According
Angels
to him,
did.
No, according
The
to
messenger
him,
of God did.
Jesus is God, and Jesus walked the earth for 33 years.
Actually, Jesus
and he
is
was a
God, but
human
he's not
being.
the Father, right?
Wait a minute. How many times did God come to earth as a human being?
But you're speaking about Christianity, so in Christianity God has three persons.
No, that's not what I'm asking.
But no, but there is
I
God.
understand Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Well, the answer
That I
to your
understand
question
what they
is,
mean.
well, the answer to your question from a Christian perspective, and I'm not necessarily a Christian, but I understand Christianity, is that the Father never did. Because Jesus himself said, in John, no one has seen the Father, but he has come from the Father. So the Father never did. But God the Son did in Jesus.
Now, when you say God the Son,
Yeah.
in what sense is he the Son of God?
In the sense that he's eternally begotten. God, as long as...
That is blasphemy.
Well, not to be it,
The word begotten is blasphemy.
No.
Yes, it is.
No, because
there's
you...
a man and a woman coming together.
No, but that's not what it
That's
means.
what begotten
But that's not
means.
what it means. What it means...
That's what it means.
No, it's not what it means. What it means is that God didn't create the Son out of nothing. The Son generated from God's very being himself. That's what it means. You were talking about the Council of Nicaea.
You have to find another word than
In the beginning, God, and then His Son Jesus Christ, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father, through Him all things are made. It doesn't mean begotten as in God have sex with someone. That's what Mormons believe. It means begotten as opposed to created.
But that's why you
But the
have to
reason
get
why they
rid of
say that
word.
is because the way that Jesus came into, the way that the Son comes into being from the Father is completely different to the way anything else
Okay, first of all, let's go back to the original question. How many times, according to the Bible, how many times did God come to earth as a human being?
Well, in answer to your question again, God the Father never did, God the Son did in the form of Jesus.
Jesus. And he believes that Jesus is God, and
Well,
God.
Christians believe that,
Fine.
yeah.
Okay. Now, again, I will ask.
But they believe that he's God the Son. Because Christians believe that there are three persons who are all one
They
God.
believe God is schizophrenic anyway.
They believe what, sorry?
He's schizophrenic, that he has
No, that's not respectful, is it, to say God's schizophrenic?
No,
They
that's
don't
what they're believing.
Apart from anything else, says two, there's three here.
Okay.
Right?
Now, can I borrow your Bible?
I'll give you one. I will give you one for yourself.
You need to say schizophrenic or something like that.
Every week I'm going to bring a Bible. Take it. You want?
I don't want to.
How come?
I have one at home.
I have a Bible to put away. If you come from a church, that, I think that put new ones and old ones. This is the name of the church.
Can I ask you a question?
हाँ जी सर जी गाड़ी सब ठीक ठाक
Yeah, about help you today.
अभी थोड़ा सा वार्म अप कर रहा हूँ गाड़ी
ये ना कि पूरा इंजन चल जाए
Okay.
या मैं सुन रहा हूँ इसको
No, God the Son. Look, I keep saying to you, but you
No, that's
don't have
not.
to accept
That is not
it.
Jesus. I'm
You don't
sorry.
know, it's God the
That
Son.
is not Jesus.
It's God the Son.
That is not Jesus. That is God Himself. Because it says without mother, without father, without beginning, without end. That's God.
Well,
So this
but
is
it's-
not.
Christians
This
believe
is
it's
not
not.
Jesus. This is God. Okay, that is not Jesus. Without mother, without father, without beginning, without end. That's God. That's not a human being.
It's God the Son.
It's not God the Son. No, it doesn't say that. If every word in this Bible,
According to you, God the Son in the beginning.
He was born of a woman.
Sorry, I didn't hear.
God the Son had a beginning.
No, he didn't. That's what
Never had a
Arius
beginning.
taught.
Did God?
That's what Arius taught.
Did God the Son
So
have an
Arius was
ending?
excommunicated in the 4th century, right?
Did God?
That's why it says eternally begotten. There never was. Look, at the end of it, there never was a time when he wasn't begotten, because God is always true to Himself.
Okay, did God
And
the
God
Son-
was never without the Son. In other words, God has always been the Father.
Did God the Son have an ending?
Does He have an end?
Did God the Son have an ending? So He didn't end on the cross. The Son.
How can the God the Son end? God the Son is God.
God the Son didn't end on the cross.
God the Son is also God.
Jesus died on the cross.
Well, He was not God.
He wasn't just God.
What else?
You see, the Christian teaching, as I said, whether you accept it or not, you've got to get it right and what it is. So God the Son is the person, and that person became man through something you believe in, right? The virgin birth. Why, if Jesus was just a prophet, why, by the way, is there a virgin birth? Are there any other prophets that had a virgin birth? You believe in a virgin birth, right? But why wasn't Muhammad a virgin birth? No, but what was so special about Jesus to you that he needed to have a
God
virgin
creates
birth?
in 4 different ways. No father, no mother, father and mother, no father.
Okay,
It's
right.
God's power.
So what the Church Orthodox Christianity teaches, right, is that in Jesus Christ there are two natures. There's a divine nature and a human
But
nature.
then that's not possible. Nothing that God has ever
but-
created can
but
be
it's a
100%.
different- but that's a different
can
issue.
be 200% of anything.
Yeah,
It
but
cannot
that's a different
possible.
issue. It's like me saying it's not possible for Muhammad to ride to heaven on a horse. It's a different issue. That's what you believe, and I'm explaining to you what Christians believe. I'm not saying that it's right
no,
or
no,
wrong.
that's a different thing. I'm saying nothing can be 200%.
It's not 200%.
It's 100% a book. It cannot be 100% a book and a glass of water. It's not possible. So Jesus cannot be 100% God and 100% man.
Do you have a
It's
soul?
not possible. Let's not go down that road.
Okay.
Let's
Do you
not
have a
go
soul?
down that road. Yeah. I have
have
a
a
soul, a
soul?
body, yes, and a
Okay,
spirit.
so you have two natures.
Yes, so
Is your soul, are you half soul, half body, or are you a whole body and a whole soul?
you can see my body, you can't see my soul.
You are a whole
Man
body
become
and a
a
whole
living
soul.
soul.
Huh?
Man become a living soul.
I'm also
You're a
bones.
living
I'm
soul.
also bones and flesh.
Yeah, but you are a whole body and a whole soul. That's 200% according to you.
It's not 200%.
You're 200% yourself.
No,
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah.
How can it be 200%?
Actually, I think the distinction here needs to be made between what the brother is saying about what Christian Orthodox belief is, as opposed to what the scriptures actually say.
Actually say.
Now, if, for example, the brother talks about two natures, the first point of call, logically speaking, would be to go to the source itself and see what the source says. Yeah,
The what says?
the source.
The source.
Yeah.
Right.
So obviously, I mean, it wouldn't make sense that we develop a whole idea and not base it on the source itself. So I would actually consider this as one perspective that, okay, if we said that there are two natures of a human being, in this instance Jesus Christ,
That's what.
Christian Orthodoxy understands
But
it to
not
be.
Coptic Christians,
Yeah.
right? Coptic Christians are slightly different.
Aside, yeah. But if that is the case, then the first thing I would want to do is, okay, let's go to the source. Does the source have anything specific in relation to this idea? Do we have anything?
Yes, because confusingly, the Bible teaches that speaks of Jesus as a man.
Yes.
He prays,
Yes.
he eats,
Yes.
he at one stage he has regrets,
Yeah.
he does all the things that a man
Yeah.
does, but he also has the attributes of God.
Right. I'm sorry, I'm Shabir, you are?
Lionel.
Nice meeting you, Lionel.
You too,
No,
yeah.
I
So
can
that's
agree
why
that,
so
right.
That's why it's confusing. It is.
I understand what you mean, but if we take it from that perspective, like I just said, and I use the word specifically,
Yeah.
if I were to look at the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, I would want to see a specific statement which clarifies this two natures idea.
See, the thing is, though, that the Bible was written by the Bible. Even like non-believer scholars, right, would
Yeah.
say that probably the earliest book in the Bible is something like. They think maybe Kings or Samuel, but in any event, it was written over about 1,000 years
Okay.
by different people.
Yes.
When the first books were written, the Jews hadn't been exposed to Greek culture at all.
Okay.
By the time the last books were written, you had a very, very different culture. It's different from the Quran, which, whatever you believe about its ultimate authorship, we know
Yeah.
was written in the space of about 20, 30 years.
Right.
So, in other words, that's why it's more coherent, because it was written in the space of 20, 30 years. The Bible was written over about 1,000 years by people who
Yeah.
started off not being exposed to Hellenistic culture. By
Yeah.
the end of it, they've been exposed to Persian Zoroastrian culture
Yes.
and Hellenistic culture as well.
Yes.
So
No.
there's a development
That's
of
quite.
ideas.
I
in there.
can
So
agree with you.
It is a more difficult book to kind
Yeah.
of like derive a single message from.
I can actually agree with that view. However, again, like I said, if there is a believer, yeah, and he has a perspective, that perspective ought to be initially based on the source material itself. Now, the way I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, if I agree with you,
Become a libertarian, by the way.
Have a look at it.
if
This is what you need to be, libertarian.
right, we'll go next to that once we have.
Give him a copy of Quran.
We have yeah.
I've got one. Mohammed Marmaduke Pickford's
Yeah,
translation.
but as I was saying, brother, you see, I would
Nice name,
want,
Mohammed Marmaduke.
yeah, I would want to look at the source, and
Yeah, he was English, yeah.
when you said that there was a development, an evolution of thought,
Yeah.
and how it influenced the Bible. That
Yeah,
is the
it did,
suggestion
yeah,
being
yeah.
made.
Yeah.
Now the question is this: if there were influences, and those influences somehow crept into this particular book, one would now have to decipher exactly what was revealed or
It's confusing because you live in a Protestant country. Because Protestants have a slightly different. The Bible,
Yeah.
imagine I've got a Bible here. The Bible isn't what's called a flat book.
Like one.
No, I've got plenty. Don't worry. It's not like a flat book.
Yes.
So in other words, you don't start at the beginning and then get to the end and say, what does it mean? To a Jew, the Old Testament is like a flat book.
Yeah.
To a Christian, you've got an Old Testament and a New Testament.
Yes.
And as Paul himself says in his epistles, there are things to a Christian that are hidden in the Old Testament.
yes,
So Saint Augustine, Saint
Yes.
Augustine, he said the new is hidden in the old, and the old is revealed in
the new. Yes.
So the way a Christian should read the Bible is they should read the New Testament, then the Old Testament, and a Christian interpretation of the Old Testament, as opposed to say a Jewish or an Islamic.
Right, yeah.
Is precisely that. It's interpreted using what's called a hermeneutical screen.
Yes.
Of the New Testament.
Absolutely.
right? So at the end of the day, that means that you will have something written in the Old Testament that, to all intents and purposes, seems to be saying A. The
Yes.
Christian will say it says B.
Yes.
And the reason they'll say it says B is because there's a comment in the New Testament that says that.
yes. That's understandable. However, if we are looking at the source and somebody is going to suggest to us that, look, there may be something that is hidden which is not apparent. It may become apparent later.
Yeah.
Understood. But if we are going to take specific statements, as you were discussing about John 1:1 also, I would suggest that for two natures to be made apparent, something specific has to have been mentioned. Now we know from the conversation so far that there isn't anything specific. If there was, there wouldn't be a conversation.
Yeah, but you see, to some extent, I think again, it's because you are yourself a Muslim, presumably, and you live in a Protestant culture. Now, see, Orthodox Christianity is not a religion of the book in the same way that Protestants claim it is, in the same way that Islam is. It's not, because Christians didn't believe, oh look, these guys have come and they've given us this book and they've said this is the book, believe it. Because, you know, the Bible itself was only actually canonized over a period of time. It took 300 or 400 years.
Yes.
And to this day, there was never a formal canonical list. So, for example, there are certain churches in the East that don't recognize the book of Revelation.
Yes.
So, but what if you actually read Timothy, for example, then what the Bible, the New Testament actually teaches is that Jesus founded the church based upon the 12 apostles.
Yes.
And actually, authority resides in the church, and the Bible is a part of that authority.
Now,
but there's nothing in. Sorry, just to finish. There's nothing in Orthodox Christianity that says that you can only believe something explicitly taught in the Bible. What it says is you can't believe anything that contradicts the Bible, and that's a different thing.
I entirely agree with you. But when you make a distinction between the church and the source, my question
but
still.
The source is Jesus, not the Bible, right?
I still initially would contend which one ought to come first, the source or the church.
Well, the way I look at it is that as a Christian, I don't believe in the Bible, I believe in Jesus.
Right, so are you a Christian?
Am I a Christian?
Yeah, because earlier on you said, well, I'm not necessarily a Christian.
The guy standing here preaching the gospel probably would say I'm not a Christian.
He might not identify with the way you look at things.
I'm kind of like I'm kind of like a Sufi Muslim.
So whatever that is.
Give me a hard time. But
no, I won't. Of course not. Of course not.
So,
we're all students of knowledge
I
here.
look at the Bible.
In your belief, who you think Jesus was?
What do I think Jesus was? I think Jesus was God the Son. I do. Because Jesus rose. At the end of the day, what makes me a Christian ultimately isn't that I believe something in the 4th chapter of Genesis or something like that. It's that I believe Jesus rose from the dead. That's what makes me a Christian. So I believe Jesus rose from the dead, and I don't believe Muhammad did, and I don't believe Moses did.
And you think Jesus was the Son of God?
Yeah, Moses, Moses is come back in Jesus' name.
Jesus was Son of God in and of itself doesn't mean anything special. Calling someone a son of God. So, for example, the Old Testament calls angels sons of God, right? So, in and of itself, it doesn't mean anything special. But Jesus was Christ, and Christ is Greek for the Messiah. So, to me, the New Testament reveals something the Old Testament didn't reveal. The Old Testament said that the Messiah is going to come, and then in the New Testament we find out that in some way that is difficult to understand, I acknowledge, that the Messiah is in fact a hypostasis, is the Greek word. It's a particular personality in the Godhead himself.
So do you believe in the Trinity?
Sorry, brother, can I just ask, when you talk about the hypostatic union, what reference would you be able to, off the top of your head, quote which justifies that?
Well, there isn't one.
Right. So is it a church ruling?
Perhaps maybe in John's Gospel where Jesus says, the Father is greater than I, but I and the Father are one, or I'm in the Father in
now,
me.
Can I just, while we're at it, you know the statement, and it's a common one that we discuss. When you say I and my Father and one, what do you take out of that?
When I what, sorry?
Do you know the verse that you just mentioned, I and the Father are one?
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting because Jesus then goes on to say, I and the Father are one just as you and I are one. Right?
And
so you could argue...
No, only verse, the verse that you are, sorry.
Your question, in fact, and I'm actually dealing with what I presume.
All right,
okay.
Answer that question.
So, do you want to answer it? Listen.
No, you go ahead.
When you say I am the Father one, God is a spirit and He is a spirit too.
Yeah, but Jesus
Who is a spirit
says,
too?
Yes.
But Jesus
right, okay, sorry.
but the unity that Jesus claims for his relationship with God, he also attributes to his relationship with the apostles.
exactly.
So it could just be a unity of
but do you not think
of purpose?
Right.
In purpose.
Do you not think that perhaps if you looked at that statement, it might clarify what it ought to be meaning? Don't you think?
No, because you see, I think that if you read,
They're quoting
if
it.
you read some of the other epistles,
Yeah.
when Jesus said, "Before God was, I am," you know why that's really.
No, he didn't say that.
He did say that.
No, he said before Abraham
Oh, okay.
was.
What it was, I
Okay,
am.
now
The reason why that's
didn't he say-
important is because why does Jesus saying "I am"? Why was that important?
But why didn't he say before Adam was I am?
Well, because-
Why did he say
oh, no.
Abraham?
Well, it doesn't matter. The point
Actually,
is,
can I just say, I think this is just diverting. If we can just restrict ourselves to that, maybe we can have a clearer understanding of what he meant when he said, "Before Abraham was, I am."
Yeah.
At least that is my
So
contention.
in
If you
the,
don't
in
mind,
the Old
Uncle.
Testament,
Yeah.
you know Yahweh, right? The word that Jews don't say it, right? They leave out the vowels and they use it. So that most scholars think that that's Hebrew for something like "I am that I am" or "I am as I am." So most Christians tend to believe that Jesus was specifically referring to God's own personal name that he gave to Moses, Yahweh, which means "I am that I am," when he said, "Before Abraham was, I am."
Yeah,
So what
sorry-
they believe
sorry,
is that
brother.
he was saying two things. One, that he pre-existed, in other words, he wasn't just a man, and two, that he had a special identity or unity with God, because he uses the same expression that God uses when he gives his own name to Moses.
Can I just respond to that? Actually, brother, you might have got it slightly misunderstood here, because what you are talking about is contained in the Old Testament, in Exodus. The words actually used, they were Ahia, Asher, Ahia.
Right.
Whereas you are talking about Yahweh.
Yeah.
Now, if I were to turn this and say, okay, if we are to look at a particular statement of Jesus Christ as an example, when he said about what the Creator is, what is the greatest commandment?
Yeah.
What is it?
He actually refers to the Deuteronomy 16, I think it is, which is what the Jews say every day. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one.
Now, if I were to say this is
And
what,
love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind,
Yeah.
soul, and strength.
But-
And your
but-
neighbor as yourself.
right? But if we are looking at the word Yahweh, if we can just switch slightly to the way it is understood, So you have them saying Shema Israel, Adonai Elohenu, Adonai Echad.
Yeah.
Now, if I were to take this and I say it's saying Yahweh, Yahuwah, Elo, Yahuwah, Echad.
Yeah.
What would that say to you? Is that talking about a being with more than one nature? Is it? Do you think?
Talks about one.
No, not that particular passage.
No, it isn't.
I don't think
But
it
now,
is.
if you were to take that,
The problem
look
we have
at
is we have to. The problem. Can I just borrow your mic
Yeah,
just
sure.
for a second? The problem we have is we have to reconcile all these other statements.
I was
for
about to.
example,
I was-
an important one is
Thank you.
So the New Testament, so Hebrews and also John and also Colossians teach quite clearly that God made the universe through Jesus,
Right. But if we were to say, for example,
or through the Son of God.
Right. If I were to follow that reasoning and I tell you, okay, if we take it from Genesis to Revelation and we approach it from the common perspective of how the Creator ought to be understood. So, for example, if we take the Old Testament, yes? In the Old Testament, is there any idea of a triunity of a Creator? There isn't. If we look at the verse that you quoted, and I'm just going back to that.
The Christian teaching of the Trinity completely contradicts the Jewish revelation of God.
Right. Now, that's a
That's
start.
no,
I agree with you.
I said I am not a conventional.
Of course, I appreciate that.
And that's
Look,
why
let's look at the
do what
information.
Unitarians are.
Yes.
I used to be a Unitarian, right?
What changed your mind then?
Because the New Testament clearly contradicts that teaching.
Right. Okay. Let's
As
see.
far as you can only really be, I mean, to be honest with you, you can only believe that Jesus wasn't God if you reject the New Testament. I'm not going to do
Right.
that.
I understand. But what if you can accept the New Testament, except look at it the way it was intended?
No, because I don't think it was intended the way
Right.
you say.
Okay. How do you know? I haven't even said it.
Because because you think it was intended to believe in a Unitarian.
No, I don't think
What
that.
do you believe?
I say, and like I started off with, if we were to look at the source and the evidence and consider the evidence for what the evidence is, rather than superimposing a particular thought.
I don't think
so,
I'm doing that.
No, I didn't accuse you of that. I'm
No,
just saying
but
that
I
is what
really
we
don't,
ought to
because
do.
I actually,
I
to me, it
accept.
would make more sense if it was Unitarian.
Right. All right, it would make more sense if it was Unitarian, but according to the evidence, you think it isn't.
I think that the evidence for it, not just of the New Testament itself, but the evidence of comments made, for example, the earliest comments we have about the Christians, like the comment that Suetonius made about the Christians worship Jesus as God.
Yes.
Right? The comments about how the Christians eat their God, referring to the Mass, right?
Yes.
So all the evidence is that Christians did actually believe that Jesus was God in the first century.
But do you not think that you are actually accepting the notion that you yourself mentioned, that if, for example, there were a culture in which the idea of gods being eaten, gods fighting, etc., impinged on the very understanding that you are relying on?
No, I don't think that. To me, it's about authenticity. So I'm perfectly free to say I don't believe Jesus was God, but I can't say the New Testament doesn't teach Jesus was God, because if you actually allow the text to speak for itself, and if you look at it in the context of other comments that are made as well, I think it's clear the Christians did believe that Jesus
I understand.
was God.
Yeah, I can see that. But now what I am saying is exactly what I'm trying to, the approach I'm trying to take here is, for example, I and my Father are one. Now, is it in any way suggesting some form of unity with the Creator? Yeah?
Is it suggesting?
Is it suggesting some form of unity with the Creator?
Not just in that verse.
Not in that one. But isn't it explained?
But what you have to understand is that the same gospel in its first few verses teaches that God made the universe through whoever Jesus was before he became man Jesus.
Right, okay.
And that's quite a big thing to do, right? So when you have a man, and so far John's told us this man pre-existed. In the pre-existence he was called the Word of God. He was in the beginning with God, and everything that was made through him. And then he comes along and says, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. No one else has seen the Father except for me, because I come from the Father, and I and the Father are one. Then it's about evidence building up, right?
Absolutely. But now, if I were to take you to the very point that you made, and say John 1:1 that you're referring to. Yeah. Okay. The words used there, are they? I'm going to use this as it is commonly understood. In the Greek that is used, what are the words used there?
For what?
For God.
It's hoi theo.
And the second one?
The second one is that one, I think. Well, the second one doesn't have a hoi in front of it.
It doesn't, does it?
Yeah.
What distinction is it making?
Well, this is what the Jehovah's Witnesses claim, right?
No, forget the Jehovah's Witnesses. What do we think?
Well, I won't, because this is that they actually have their own version of the Bible based upon that, and they claim that it should say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a God, and the Word is with God.
What is it currently?
It says, and the Word was.
Can you open it? Can you open it, please, and just read John 1:1?
But you see,
so basically, what
I've looked into this issue, and to me, the clincher is that if you actually look at what non-believing scholars of the text say, they say that the conventional translation, the majority of them say that is the better translation.
Which one?
The current one that says, and the Word was God.
Right, I have no problem, but like I said, I'm looking at the words themselves. You see, if there's an understanding to be derived, and there's some form of confusion between the parties concerned having a discussion, then it would be advisable to go to the source. Now, if I can just...
But there's other stuff as well, friend.
Absolutely.
So what did Thomas say when he touched Jesus' wound?
Right, if we can just, before we go there, if we can just address the primary points, Can I... Right, sorry.
Lord, my God.
Here. In the beginning was the
Word,
and the Word was with
God,
and the Word was.
You can see it, yeah. God.
What does it say?
It says God.
Right. Now, now you see what I asked you. What are in Greek? What are the words that are used here?
This is hoi theo, and
what is that
doesn't
one?
have a hoi in front of it.
Now, what is that?
Exactly.
And what is the distinction being made there if it doesn't have the same when it should obviously?
You obviously know a bit about ancient language, so you know that ancient Greek is incredibly complicated.
Right. Excellent.
You can read that, boy.
Excellent.
Most
1 second, I'll come to that.
Most scholars agree with that translation.
I have no problem, but what I am saying is that look, if we were to look at the statements themselves, try and see if there is perhaps another understanding that can be derived from it. So for example, I'm just going back to that one where it says, I and my Father are one. Yeah. Now, if there was any association of divinity that Christ had with the Creator, with the Father, according to the Christian understanding, I would assume that he would want to clarify that.
But
if I can,
it also has to bear in mind, you see, it's about, if you're looking at a text, so the way it seems to me is, you look at the New Testament, there's like 90% of things about Jesus talk about him like an ordinary man.
yes,
Then there's about 10% that talk about him as a divine being.
yes,
Now, you tend to need to interpret from the lower to the higher, because if I say, well, Jesus is a man and I'm going to exclude the God ones, then that's actually quite difficult. Whereas if I say, in fact, what's happening here is a gradual revelation of something, and it's easier to reconcile the man Jesus statements with the divine than the other way around. Because if Jesus was divine, he could choose to also have human attributes. But if he was purely human, then he couldn't have had divine attributes.
Right.
So it doesn't need a whole lot. And there are about 5 statements in the New Testament that would appear to unambiguously say that in some way that the church took 300 years to work out, Jesus is God.
give me one.
Give him that. Take that.
So let's
And the
talk
word
about-
was made flesh, or no?
So let's talk about
let's
Thomas
find
then.
something
So let's
specific.
talk about
Yeah.
Thomas.
The word made flesh and dwelt among us.
Okay, no problem, brother.
So Thomas, when Thomas touched the wounds of the resurrected Christ, he said, "My Lord and my God."
Yeah,
No one corrected him. If Jesus had been a man, he would have corrected him sternly for his blasphemy, but he didn't.
right.
So why
Okay.
didn't he
So,
correct him?
right. Well, if that is the case, and I'm going to answer this, going back to what I was trying to address. Yeah. You see, you're absolutely right. He sees the hands, the feet, and he says, "My God." Yeah. But he was not there when he appeared to them in the upper room. When Christ appeared to them first, Thomas was not there, was he?
I don't know. Was he not
Right,
there?
okay, he was not there.
Right.
Okay, that is why he asked, because when Christ apparently appeared in the upper room,
Yeah.
the disciples were all in their doldrums about the master. Yeah. And I'm quoting from Luke, okay? When he turns up, the narration tells us that they got very terrified and affrighted
Yeah.
because they had seen a spirit.
Yeah.
Because he came in and just said shalom. Yeah. Now, he then says to them, he says, "What is wrong with you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Handle me and see
But
that it is."
This one was.
Yeah, I'll come back to that.
Philip was there.
It is I myself.
Yeah.
For a spirit has no flesh and bones as
Yeah.
you see me have. Okay.
Yeah.
Now he's saying something to them, isn't he?
Phantasm, I think, is the actual word that's used. Yeah.
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 What is he saying to them though?
What is he saying?
Yes. When he turns up and he says, "Look, why are you terrified? Why are you afraid?"
Yeah.
And the verse actually says, because they supposed that they had seen a spirit. So he says to them, "Handle me and see."
But because
If I can just finish, maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah,
no, not to
sure.
worry.
No, you
Yeah.
carry on.
So he says, "Handle me and see,
Estimating God.
for a spirit has no flesh and bones
That's right.
as you see me
Yeah.
have."
Yeah.
They were then overjoyed, and he turns and says something very strange. He says, "Have you here a broiled fish and
Anything
honeycomb?"
to eat.
Yeah.
Something to eat. Now, question is, if I go back to what I had been trying to get to, the verse, "I and my Father are one." Okay, the association of divinity is what we are addressing. You know, as you said, start from the high, go to the low.
It's
But I
easier
would
to
suggest,
interpret that way around, yeah.
but I would suggest that shouldn't you actually look at what the very individual we are discussing has to say about it? I would suggest that is a reasonable thing to do. So, if, for example, he said, "I and my Father are one," I would ask you, what happened next in that particular segment of the New Testament? Are you familiar with it? What happens next? Right. Basically, it starts at verse 23. It's in John chapter 10. Yeah. Where he comes and they ask him, "If you are the Christ, tell us plainly." And he goes on to tell them, "My sheep hear my voice." Yeah. On and on. Then he says, "No one can pluck them out of my hands. No one can pluck them out of my Father's hands. I and my Father are one."
Right.
Now, there's an immediate association of divinity because that is what my Christian friends tell me. I said, "Well, no, let's go a bit further. What happens next?" Well, the next verse, yes, they pick up stones to stone him.
Yeah.
Now, why? Yeah.
Because by calling himself God's son, he's made himself equal with God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is what the charge is.
Yeah.
So you know what happens next? Verse 32, he says, "Many a good works have I shown you. For which of the good works do you want to stone me?"
Yeah.
Now, just think about this. Lionel, isn't it?
Lionel. Yeah.
Lionel,
Yeah.
let's think about this. He has made a statement.
Yeah.
They have picked up stones to stone him.
Yeah.
He looks at them wanting to stone him, and he turns around and says to them, many a good works have I shown you from the Father.
Yeah.
For which of the good works do you stone me? What is the association between his statement and them picking up stones and him thinking it's for good works?
Well, why would he not just reject their interpretation of what he said?
Excellent. But that's not the question. The question is, he said,
That's
I and my
my
Father,
answer,
I know what you mean. He said, I and my Father are one. They pick up stones. He says to them, many a good works have I shown you.
Okay.
Now, if I can just, it does necessarily mean from what I'm reading that he never made the association about the I and my Father are one with them picking up stones. However, the next verse, they respond to him. They say, we are not going to stone you for a good works,
Yeah.
but for blasphemy.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, what is blasphemy?
Well, I know
When
what
you
blasphemy
talk
is.
against God, blasphemy.
You know what it is?
Well, different religions have different ideas.
No, let's stick to Christianity. What is
Well,
blasphemy?
this was Judaism, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, whatever.
A Jew, it wasn't Christianity, was it? So
Right.
a Jew and a
Okay.
Muslim would both regard blasphemy as being, well, amongst
And what would
other
a
things,
Christian think?
Making yourself one with God or equal with God.
Association with God.
Yeah.
Now, isn't that the
Gods.
charge that they've just
You're
put
calling
against
them
him?
gods.
Now, he said, I and my Father are one. They picked up stones. He clarifies to them, I do many good works. Why are you stoning me? They say, not for a good works we are stoning you. We stone you for blasphemy.
Yeah.
For after being a man, you make yourself a...
God.
Is that true?
Is what true?
What that statement says when the Jews said it.
Well, Jesus was very obtuse, wasn't he? He taught in parables, and he actually said things in such a way that people who didn't have faith wouldn't understand what he was saying.
I agree. But do you agree with what they said?
No.
You don't?
No.
Okay.
I agree with, because at the end of the day, you see, a Christian is someone who has to believe that Judaism wasn't complete.
Okay.
The revelation of God
Yeah.
wasn't complete until Jesus came, and there were aspects of that revelation
Now-
that were not given to the Jews.
I can agree with that, but Lionel, you see, the next verse actually explains it for you. Because in the next verse,
Blasphemy
he
is
said,
Christ that he is the Son of God.
if I can just finish.
Christ that he is the Son of God.
Before
I'll come to that.
Jesus,
He comes-
Everybody was wrong. That's what you said.
If we can just carry on, sorry. Yeah? He says, when they said to him, for a good works we stone you, not, but for blasphemy. For after being a man, you make yourself a god. He then turns to them and said, is it not written in your law? I said, ye are gods. What did he mean?
Referring to one of the Psalms.
Psalms.
Yeah.
But what did he mean? Why did he not just say, of course I am?
Because he was obtuse like that. That wasn't the only time he
Now,
said that.
if you are going to tell me,
It's like when Pilate said to him, are you the king of the Jews? He said, you have said it, or you say that I am.
no,
whatever. I mean,
no, he
that's
said
just the
that.
way spoke,
He said
right?
that, but if you go across the 4 Gospels, he says, it is as you say. Yeah? The question is this, if he is making a statement, and now he's making it clear to them, like I would say to you, you are right, take from the top, go downward, but if something is clear, and then you make it a confusion, the problem is not with the text, the problem is with the receiver. So for example, when Christ says to them, many a good works I've shown you, why are you stoning me? So it is clear from the statement that he is not associating his statement of I and my Father are one with them picking up stones. So question then next is, when they accuse him of blasphemy, as a person who accepts that Christ had 2 natures, is possibly God the Son,
Who's me?
possibly, no, I said if a person
Oh, okay.
believes,
Yeah.
yes, then necessarily when they put that accusation to him, Christ Jesus, if he was a truthful individual, would have said, actually, yes, I am.
Well,
But he didn't.
Can I
Yeah,
maybe
So-
jump in here with
so
a
now-
possible
Yeah,
suggestion?
sure, you can.
No,
That's
you
okay.
cannot. Of
That's
course you
okay,
can. Of
okay.
course you can. Richard, how are you? You okay?
I'm just wondering, could
Yeah.
perhaps what is going on in this verse be
Yes.
that Jesus has made a claim of divinity by saying, I and the Father are one? Typically, I don't actually go to that passage, but
His
let's
time
say,
zoned he is.
but let's say that's what's
I
going
landed
on.
from Australia this morning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you?
But-
Oh, I do.
I'm from here.
Sorry, I don't want
Welcome back
to
to the UK.
prolong
I'm good,
it
you
if you're
carry
tired.
on.
Okay, yeah, sorry, Richard.
Trying to stay awake.
Carry on.
So could it be the case that he is actually claiming to be God by saying, I and the Father are one, and then when he says, for what works do you stone me, is his point there, look, I'm doing these good works, how can you condemn what I'm doing? If you agree I'm doing good by the power of God, should you not at least consider my claim?
Right.
Is that a possible interpretation
There
of the
is.
passage?
There is a possibility there. I agree with you. But if you go back to verse 23, 24, 25, he actually tells them, many good works have I shown you. Yeah? My sheep hear me. My sheep follow me.
Yes.
The narrative continuously is talking about what? Good works.
Okay.
So when he does make the statement, look, it's quite logical. No one can pluck them out of my Father's hands. Yeah? What do we have in 5:30? I can of my own self do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my will, but the will of him that sent me. Yes? He is saying, look, if the Creator has given me followers and they are listening to me, no one can take them out of my hands. No one can pluck them out of my Father's hands. I and my Father are one. Now, up to there, the possibility that you have raised, up to there, Jesus Christ is talking to them and is telling them about the good works that he had been doing and how the association with his disciples was being described. He then makes that statement, they pick up stones to stone him. The question that you have raised here needs to be addressed there at that point. When they picked up stones,
Sorry, remind me the chapter, John.
John chapter 10, verse
Thank you.
31.
Carry on.
Yeah, he says, I and my Father are one. The next verse, they pick up stones to stone him. Now, why does Jesus, according to the narrative, why does he say to them, many good works have I shown you from my Father. For which of the good works do you want to stone me? Now, question. The narrative from verse 23 is clear that he talks about good works, his association with good works and nobody being plucked out of his hands or the Father's hands. Then he says, I and my Father are one. They pick up stones. He says, many good works have I shown you. For which of the good works do you stone me? They say, no, it's not for the good works, but for blasphemy.
Sure, okay.
What was the blasphemy?
Claiming to be one with the Father.
According to them.
He claimed that he is the Son of God. He claimed that he's the
According to the text, we have to look at the text and what the text says.
For making yourself God, which I presume is a reference back to verse 30, at least verse 30.
It has to be. It has to be, otherwise we are going to accuse them of suddenly adding something in which wasn't. So the narrative is a logical one. So he says to them, many good works do I stone, many good works, Australia, many good works have I done, for which of good works do you stone me? They say, we stone you not for a good works, but for blasphemy. For after being a man, you make yourself what? Like unto what?
Yes.
Now, what does that mean?
To claim to be the divine.
Totally divine, partially divine, miniaturely divine, which divine?
I'm not sure what concept.
Excellent. I agree. But absolutely. But I'm so glad you said it. As he said, the Jewish minds. Yeah. Now, the association with the Creator of any kind, and they will consider it to be blasphemy, or as a general rule.
Okay.
Am I correct?
The nature of Jewish monotheism and what we consider to be divine is a complex subject.
Absolutely it is. But having said that, now we have Jesus Christ respond. My question always has been, as we were discussing it with my brother here, Lionel, if Jesus was true to himself and was a truthful man, what would he have said when they associated divinity with him? What should he have said?
There are two points I want to make here. One actually, which Lionel made very well, which is actually in the Gospels. We do not always see Jesus being crystal clear. He does speak in parables. He does hide himself from those who are hard of heart or whom he has. Exactly. But I would also say, I think the point, I still stand by my original point, which is he's not necessarily denying that he and the Father are one or that he is God, but he may be trying to say, look at what I'm doing, look at my good works. Do I seem like a bad man? Do I seem like a lunatic or a demon possessed? You see that the good works I bear witness to the fact that God is working in me. So why won't you consider my claim? So I think basically he may well be claiming I am divine, yes, as I've just claimed. But why aren't you considering my evidence?
I can agree with you. But can I?
He used a similar kind of approach when he healed the man on the Sabbath as well.
Yes, absolutely. But here is again, I'm glad you picked that up. You see, if I were to take your view and ask you this, on a general level, starting from Genesis up to the New Testament, Was there any human being who was associated with God?
I think in a sense, yes, in that God at times seemed to appear in a human-like form. This
Give
is
me an
something-
example
So,
of a man, I said.
okay, so there are angelic appearances, and sometimes angels. take
Angelic
form of
appearances, I
humans.
can understand that, Richard.
Okay,
Apologies.
but it's
I
an
want a
angelic human
particular
form.
individual. Give me one instance in the Old Testament where there is a record of the Creator having come down as a man.
Okay, so Michael Hayes is much better at this than I am. He talks about this in the Old Testament.
Of
But
course.
to give some examples
Yeah.
where there seems to be plurality in the Old Testament, things
Yes.
like, you might say God appearing to Abraham at the Oaks of Mamre, I don't know, is it Genesis 18 or
Yes.
something, and there God appears as a man walking with him. Jacob, thank you, wrestling with him. And also actually some prophecies of the Messiah, which seem to suggest the Messiah, a human figure, might be divine. Things like
No problem.
Zechariah, Isaiah 9. So
I
for
have
me,
no
there's a
problem.
lot of
Yeah.
evidence in the Old Testament that God could actually either appear in the Old Testament as human, or indeed become incarnate as human.
I have no problem, but I did say a particular man. You used Jacob. Jacob was apparently wrestling with
Clear
God.
that it is God, though, is it?
Exactly.
Because it
Now-
also refers to him as the messenger of God.
Absolutely.
And the angel of the
Now, you see, absolutely. I was going to pick that, but no. What I said is one individual. You will see there is no record of a particular individual.
What do you mean, sorry, by
like
name?
Jesus Christ.
One, do we need a name? Do we need, what do we need?
A human being. Give me a name.
Okay, but when you say, so I may not have a certain name.
No problem. No problem.
Well,
An
I'm saying
individual.
You see those characteristics. Well, I'm saying the individuals in the Old Testament, maybe an individual in Genesis 18, the Lord on earth who called down fire from Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven.
But angels came down,
the
didn't
Messiah.
they? Angels had come down.
Well,
But I mean,
the narrative.
So, sorry.
Well, an angel simply, I mean, unless I'm mistaken, Malach.